They were America's most invisible workers. Picture this. Above ground, George Vanderbilt hosts a glittering ball in a room adorned with 16th-century tapestries from France. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light on guests draped in silk and diamonds. A 10-course meal is being prepared. Champagne flows. Laughter echoes through 70-foot ceilings. This is the Gilded Age at its most magnificent. This is the American dream made real in stone and marble. But beneath their feet, in a world they will never see, another reality unfolds. A parallel city operates in perpetual motion. 40 to 50 domestic servants move through miles of hidden corridors like ghosts. They carry buckets of coal weighing 50 pounds each. They haul water up narrow spiral staircases. They wash silk gowns by hand in steam-filled basements. They work 16, 17, sometimes 18 hours a day. And they do it all under one unbreakable rule: never be seen. This is the Biltmore estate. 250 rooms, 175,000 square feet, America's largest private home. Built between 1889 and 1895 in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. It cost $6 million to construct, the equivalent of over $200 million today. Newspapers called it a castle. Architects called it a masterpiece. The public called it the House of Dreams. But for the army of workers who kept it running, Biltmore was something else entirely. It was a machine that consumed their bodies, erased their identities, and demanded their complete invisibility. This is their story. The story that was never meant to be told. The story of America's most overworked, most humiliated, and most forgotten staff. The architect, Richard Morris Hunt, understood his assignment perfectly. George Vanderbilt wanted a French chateau in the American wilderness, but he wanted something else too, something unspoken but absolutely essential. He wanted the illusion of effortless grandeur. He wanted a home where luxury appeared magically, where meals materialized without kitchen sounds, where fires burned without anyone carrying coal, where beds were made without anyone seeing the maid. Hunt delivered. He designed two houses in one. The visible house was a masterpiece of Beaux-Arts architecture. Limestone walls, Gothic details, a banquet hall with a 70-foot ceiling, a library holding 23,000 books, an indoor pool, a bowling alley, rooms filled with Renoirs and Whistlers. But the invisible house, the one beneath and behind the grandeur, was equally complex. Hunt created an entire infrastructure of concealment. Miles of service corridors snaked behind the walls of the main rooms. These passages were narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass. They had low ceilings and dim lighting. Some had no windows at all. Servants moved through these arteries like blood through veins, invisible but essential. Spiral staircases connected the floors, but these weren't the grand staircases guests used. These were tight, steep, designed for speed and efficiency, not comfort. A servant carrying a heavy load up these stairs would arrive breathless, muscles burning. Underground tunnels connected different sections of the estate. The kitchen was separated from the dining room by long corridors to ensure no cooking smells reached the guests. Food traveled through these passages on covered trays, servants rushing to keep it hot. The laundry was buried in the basement, far from any bedroom, so the sounds of washing and the smell of lye soap would never disturb anyone sleeping above. Every major room had at least two doors, one for the family and guests, one for the servants. The servant doors were smaller, plainer, often hidden behind panels or tucked into corners. A maid could enter a bedroom, clean it completely, and exit without ever using the main door. She could vanish the moment she heard footsteps approaching. The house was designed to make her disappear. Call bells were installed throughout the mansion. A guest could pull a cord in their room, and a bell would ring in the servants' quarters, summoning help. But the servant would arrive through the hidden door, complete their task, and leave the same way. The guest would never see them enter or exit. It was as if the house itself was alive, responding to needs without human intervention. This wasn't just architecture. This was social engineering. This was a physical manifestation of Gilded Age values. The wealthy deserved beauty, comfort, and leisure. The working class deserved to provide those things while remaining unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged. Hunt's design made this hierarchy permanent, built into the very bones of the building. European estates had similar systems, but they were more open about them. In England, servants were part of the household structure. They had defined roles and a certain dignity within the hierarchy. But in America, where democratic ideals supposedly reigned, the presence of a servant class was more uncomfortable. The solution wasn't to eliminate servants. It was to hide them more effectively. Biltmore represented the perfection of this American approach. Democracy in the drawing room, feudalism in the corridors. The day begins at 5 in the morning. The servants' quarters are cold. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the windows. In summer, the attic rooms where many servants sleep become suffocating by mid-afternoon. But at 5 a.m., there's no time to think about comfort. There's work to do. The housemaids are first to rise. They dress quickly in their uniforms, plain black dresses with white aprons and caps. The uniform is more than clothing. It's a costume that transforms them from individuals into interchangeable parts of the household machine. They're no longer Mary or Elizabeth or Catherine. They're first maid, second maid, third maid. Their names don't matter. Only their function matters. They gather their supplies: buckets, brushes, rags, coal scuttles. Each maid has a list of rooms to service. The work must be completed before the family wakes at 8. That gives them 3 hours to clean, dust, and prepare 30 or more rooms. They move quickly through the dark corridors, their footsteps muffled by training and necessity. The first task is the fireplaces. Biltmore has 65 fireplaces. Before central heating became reliable, these fireplaces were essential for warmth. But they don't light themselves. Each one must be cleaned of yesterday's ashes, then restocked with coal and kindling, then lit. A coal scuttle holds about 50 pounds. A maid might carry a dozen of these in a morning. Her back aches, her arms burn, but she doesn't stop. She kneels before each fireplace, scooping out the cold ashes into a bucket. The ash gets on her hands, her dress, and her hair. She'll wash later if there's time. She arranges the new coal carefully, building a structure that will burn efficiently. She lights it and waits to make sure it catches. Then she moves to the next room, and the next, and the next. While the housemaids work on the fireplaces, other servants are preparing breakfast. The kitchen staff has been awake since 4:30. The head cook is already barking orders. Bread must be baked. Eggs must be prepared. Bacon must be fried. Coffee must be brewed, and not just for the family. Guests often stay at Biltmore for weeks at a time. A full house might mean preparing breakfast for 20 or 30 people. But the kitchen is far from the dining room. The food must travel through the service corridors, up a flight of stairs, through another corridor, and finally into the butler's pantry, where it will be plated and served. This journey takes 10 minutes. The food must stay hot. The servants must move fast. They can't run because running might spill something or make noise, but they walk as quickly as possible, a strange, hurried glide that becomes second nature. The footmen are responsible for setting the table. Every piece of silver must be polished to a mirror shine. Every glass must be spotless. Every napkin must be folded precisely. The footmen are chosen partly for their appearance. They must be tall, handsome, presentable. They're the most visible servants, the ones who will stand in the dining room during meals. But even they follow the rule of invisibility. They stand against the walls, still as statues, eyes forward. They don't speak unless spoken to. They don't react to conversations. They're human furniture. By 8 a.m., the house is ready. The fires are burning. The rooms are spotless. Breakfast is prepared. And the servants retreat to their hidden spaces, waiting for the call bells to summon them. But the work doesn't stop. It never stops. After breakfast is served and cleared, the real cleaning begins. Every room in the house must be maintained to perfection. Dust is the enemy. With 65 fireplaces burning, ash and soot settle on every surface. The maids dust the furniture, the picture frames, the sculptures, the books. They dust things worth more than they'll earn in a lifetime. A single Renoir painting, a Ming vase, a Flemish tapestry. One mistake, one slip, and they could destroy something priceless. The pressure is constant. The laundresses have the worst job in the house. They work in the basement, in a room filled with steam and the smell of lye soap. There are no windows. The temperature regularly exceeds 100 degrees. They wash everything by hand: sheets, towels, tablecloths, napkins, and the clothes. The endless, delicate, expensive clothes. A single evening gown worn by a female guest might be made of silk or satin, adorned with lace and beading. It can't be scrubbed roughly. It must be washed gently, carefully, in water that's the right temperature. Too hot and the fabric shrinks. Too cold and the stains don't come out. The laundress's hands are perpetually red and raw from the soap. Her back aches from bending over the washtubs. Her lungs burn from breathing steam all day. And the irony is crushing. She's washing a dress that cost more than she'll make in 5 years. A dress worn once for a few hours by a woman who will never know her name. A dress that will be worn again next week, creating more work, more washing, more steam, more pain. The afternoon brings new tasks. Beds must be turned down. Rooms must be refreshed. Tea service must be prepared. The Vanderbilts and their guests take afternoon tea in the library or the conservatory. This requires another coordinated effort. Sandwiches must be made. Cakes must be baked. Tea must be brewed at precisely the right temperature. China must be arranged on silver trays, and it must all arrive at exactly 4 o'clock. The servants move through their hidden corridors again, carrying trays, opening secret doors, appearing in the room just long enough to set down the service, then vanishing. A guest might look up from their book and see a maid placing a teapot on the table, but by the time they look back, she's gone, disappeared through a panel in the wall that looks like part of the woodwork. This is when the rule of invisibility becomes most humiliating. Imagine you're a housemaid. You're walking down a corridor, carrying fresh linens to a bedroom. You turn a corner and see Mrs. Vanderbilt approaching. Your heart stops. You know the rule. You've been trained. You've been warned. You cannot make eye contact. You cannot speak. You cannot continue walking as if you have the same right to use this hallway as she does. You turn your face to the wall. You stand completely still. You become an object. You hear her footsteps approaching. You hear the rustle of her dress. You smell her perfume. She passes within inches of you. She doesn't acknowledge you. She doesn't see you, because you're not supposed to exist. And you stand there, face to the wall until her footsteps fade. Then you continue with your work. You don't cry. You don't complain. Because if you do, you'll be dismissed. And dismissal means no reference letter. No reference letter means no other job. No job means poverty. So you swallow your humiliation. You accept your invisibility. You become what they need you to be. Nothing. The evening is when the house truly comes alive. Dinner at Biltmore is a performance. 10 courses, multiple wines, elaborate presentations. The dining room seats 64 people, though typical dinners host 20 to 30 guests. The meal begins at 8 and often lasts until 11. For the guests, it's an evening of leisure and conversation. For the servants, it's 3 hours of intense, coordinated labor. The kitchen is chaos. The head cook commands a staff of 6 or 7. Multiple courses are being prepared simultaneously. The soup must be ready first, then the fish course, then the meat, then the salad, then the dessert. Each course must be plated identically. Each plate must be perfect, and the timing must be precise. The footmen can't serve the next course until the previous one is cleared and the guests are ready. The footmen stand in the butler's pantry, waiting for their cue. When the butler nods, they lift their trays and enter the dining room through the service door. They move in synchronized silence, placing plates in front of each guest with practiced efficiency. They pour wine. They clear plates. They bring the next course. And they do it all without speaking, without reacting to the conversation, without showing any sign of fatigue, even though they've been standing for hours and their feet are screaming. In the dining room, George Vanderbilt is discussing art with a guest from New York. A woman in diamonds is laughing at a joke. A man is describing his recent trip to Paris. They're eating squab and drinking Bordeaux. They're surrounded by beauty and comfort, and they're completely unaware of the frantic activity happening just beyond the door. Because in the kitchen, a scullery maid has burned her hand on a hot pan. She's 14 years old. She's been working since 4:30 this morning. It's now 10 at night. She wraps her hand in a wet cloth and keeps working because there are pots to scrub. And if she stops, she'll be yelled at or worse, dismissed. Her hand will blister. It will scar. She'll carry that mark for the rest of her life. But the guests will never know. The dinner will be perfect. After the guests retire, usually around midnight, the servants begin the cleanup. The dining room must be cleared and reset for breakfast. The kitchen must be scrubbed. Every pot, every pan, every dish must be washed. The floors must be swept. The silver must be polished again for tomorrow. This work takes 2 to 3 hours. The last servant doesn't get to bed until 2 or 3 in the morning. And at 5 a.m., it starts again. This is the routine. Every day, 7 days a week. There are no weekends, there are no holidays. Christmas means more work, not less, because the family hosts elaborate celebrations. A servant might get one afternoon off per month if they're lucky. But they can't leave the estate. They have nowhere to go. Their families are often hundreds of miles away. So they spend their few free hours in their cramped rooms, trying to rest, trying to recover enough strength to do it all again. The physical toll is devastating. Servants develop chronic back problems from carrying heavy loads. They develop varicose veins from standing all day. They develop respiratory issues from breathing coal dust and chemical fumes. They develop repetitive strain injuries from the same motions performed thousands of times. And there's no workers' compensation, no health insurance, no sick leave. If you're too injured to work, you're dismissed. It's that simple. But the physical pain is only part of the story. The psychological toll is perhaps even worse. Because the rule of invisibility doesn't just apply to moments when you encounter the family. It applies to your entire existence. You're not supposed to have thoughts, feelings, desires, or dreams. You're supposed to be a function, not a person. The servants are called by their positions, not their names. The butler is just butler. The head housemaid is Mrs. Hughes, even if she's not married, because senior female servants are given the courtesy title Mrs., regardless of marital status. But the lower servants are just first maid or second footman. Their individual identities are erased. They live in rooms that are barely larger than closets. 8 feet by 10 feet is typical. Often, 2 or 3 servants share a room this size. There's a narrow bed, maybe a small trunk for personal belongings, a shared washstand. No decorations. No personal touches, no privacy. The rooms in the attic are freezing in winter because heat rises from below, but doesn't reach the top floor. They're sweltering in summer because the sun beats down on the roof all day. The rooms in the basement are damp and dark with no natural light. Compare this to the guest rooms. A typical guest bedroom at Biltmore is 400 square feet. It has a fireplace, a private bathroom with hot running water, a large bed with fine linens, upholstered furniture, artwork on the walls, and windows with views of the mountains. A guest stays for a week and enjoys more comfort than a servant experiences in a year. But the cruelest restrictions are the social ones. Servants are forbidden from having romantic relationships with each other. The reasoning is that relationships lead to distractions, which lead to mistakes. But the real reason is control. If servants form bonds, they might develop loyalty to each other instead of to the family. They might organize. They might demand better treatment. Marriage is absolutely forbidden. If a female servant marries, she's dismissed immediately. The assumption is that a married woman's loyalty belongs to her husband, not her employer. Also, she might become pregnant, which would make her unable to work. So marriage means the end of employment. Many servants spend years in service saving money, hoping to eventually marry and start a life. But they have to choose, security now or happiness later. Male servants face similar restrictions, though they're sometimes allowed to stay if they marry, provided their wife doesn't work at the estate. But the wages are so low that supporting a family on a servant's salary is nearly impossible. So most remain single, lonely, isolated. Personal visitors are not allowed. A servant can't invite a friend or family member to visit. The estate is not their home, even though they live there. It belongs to the Vanderbilts. The servants are just temporary occupants, tolerated as long as they're useful. They can't leave the grounds without permission, which is rarely granted. They're essentially trapped. Yes, they're paid. Yes, they're fed and housed, but they're not free. They've traded their liberty for survival. The psychological impact of this existence is profound. Many servants suffer from what we would now recognize as depression. They're isolated from their families. They have no social life. They have no privacy. They have no autonomy. They're told every day through 1,000 small interactions that they don't matter, that they're less than human, that their only value is in their labor. Some cope by forming secret friendships with other servants. In the brief moments between tasks, they whisper conversations in the corridors. They share food smuggled from the kitchen. They offer each other comfort and solidarity. These relationships are risky because if they're caught fraternizing instead of working, they could be punished. But they're also essential. They're the only thing that makes the life bearable. Others cope through small acts of rebellion, taking an extra biscuit from the kitchen, sitting down for a moment when they're supposed to be standing, speaking a kind word to another servant, even though talking is discouraged. These tiny violations of the rules are dangerous, but necessary. They're a way of asserting, even in the smallest way, that they're still human beings with agency. And some don't cope. Some break under the pressure. They're dismissed for making mistakes, for talking back, for showing emotion. They leave Biltmore with no references, no prospects, and nowhere to go. Some end up in worse situations, factories, mines, or on the streets. The lucky ones find positions at smaller households where the work is still hard, but the rules are less strict. Let's talk about specific people. The historical record doesn't preserve most of their names, but we know their roles. We know their experiences. We can reconstruct their lives from the architecture, from the employment records that survive, from the accounts of similar estates. The head butler is the highest-ranking male servant. He's responsible for managing all the male staff, the footmen, the valets, the hall boys. He oversees the wine cellar, the silver, the table service. He's paid more than other servants, maybe $30 a month compared to $10 or $15 for a maid. He has a slightly larger room, sometimes even a private one, but he works just as hard. Harder in some ways because he bears the responsibility for everything that happens in the front of the house. He wakes before everyone else to review the day's schedule. He inspects the footmen's uniforms. He tastes the wine to ensure it hasn't spoiled. He stands in the dining room during every meal, supervising the service, ready to step in if anything goes wrong. He goes to bed after everyone else, after he's ensured that the house is locked and secure. He has no family, no wife, no children. His life is the estate, and when he's too old to work, he'll be pensioned off with a small sum and sent away to live out his final years alone. The head laundress works in hell. That's not an exaggeration. The laundry room in the basement is hot, humid, and filled with chemical fumes. She manages a staff of 3 or 4 women who wash, dry, and iron everything used in the house: sheets, towels, tablecloths, napkins, undergarments, evening gowns, suits, children's clothes. The volume is staggering. They work with lye soap, which is caustic. It burns the skin. Their hands are perpetually red, cracked, and bleeding. They develop respiratory problems from breathing the fumes. They develop back problems from bending over wash tubs all day. And they're paid less than almost any other servant because laundry work is considered unskilled labor, even though it requires immense physical strength and careful attention to detail. A laundress might wash a silk evening gown that costs $200. That's more than she makes in a year. She washes it carefully, gently, making sure not to damage the delicate fabric. She dries it. She irons it with a heavy iron heated on a stove, making sure not to scorch it. She returns it to the lady's maid, who will hang it in the guest's closet. The guest will wear it once for a few hours. Then it will come back to the laundry, and the process will repeat. The kitchen maid is at the bottom of the hierarchy. She's often the youngest servant in the house, sometimes only 14 or 15 years old. She's responsible for the dirtiest, hardest work in the kitchen. She scrubs the pots and pans. She peels vegetables. She hauls water. She scrubs the floors. She empties the slop buckets. She's yelled at constantly by the head cook, who is under enormous pressure and takes it out on those below her. The kitchen maid dreams of being promoted to parlor maid, which is a step up. Parlor maids work upstairs, cleaning the public rooms, serving tea, answering the door. It's still hard work, but it's cleaner and slightly more prestigious. But promotion is rare. There are only so many positions, and servants stay in their jobs for years. So the kitchen maid scrubs pots and hopes and endures. The footman is chosen for his appearance. He must be tall, at least 6 feet. He must be handsome. He must have good posture. He's essentially decorative. His job is to stand in the dining room and look impressive while serving food. He wears a formal uniform, tailcoat, white gloves, polished shoes. He's trained to move gracefully, to serve from the left and clear from the right, to pour wine without spilling a drop. But the job is humiliating in its own way. He's hired for his looks, not his skills or intelligence. He's treated like a piece of furniture. He stands for hours during meals, his stomach growling because he hasn't eaten since noon, and it's now 10 at night. He watches the guests eat course after course while he remains hungry. He smiles politely while they ignore him, or worse, make jokes about him as if he can't hear. And he knows that his employment depends on his appearance. If he gains weight, if he loses his hair, if he ages poorly, he'll be dismissed. There's always a younger, more handsome man ready to take his place. So he lives with constant insecurity, knowing that his value is entirely superficial. These are the people who made Biltmore function. Not the architects or the designers or the Vanderbilts. The servants, the invisible army who carried the coal, washed the dishes, made the beds, and kept the fantasy alive. Now let's talk about what it was like when the two worlds collided. When the upstairs and downstairs came close enough to see each other, even if they never truly met. Imagine a typical Saturday evening in 1897. Upstairs, the Vanderbilts are hosting a ball. 50 guests have arrived from Asheville, from Charlotte, from as far away as New York. The women wear gowns made in Paris. The men wear white tie and tails. They gather in the banquet hall, which has been decorated with flowers and candles. An orchestra plays Strauss waltzes. Champagne is served in crystal flutes. The guests dance and laugh and gossip. This is the Gilded Age at its peak. This is what people mean when they talk about the elegance and sophistication of the era. This is the image that survives in photographs and paintings and popular imagination. But at the exact same moment, downstairs, a different scene unfolds. 40 servants are working in coordinated chaos. In the kitchen, the staff is preparing a midnight supper that will be served after the dancing. Cold meats, cheeses, breads, pastries, fruit. It must be ready at exactly midnight, not a minute before or after. In the butler's pantry, footmen are polishing glasses and arranging them on trays. They'll circulate through the ball, offering champagne, removing empty glasses, ensuring no guest ever has to wait for a drink. In the corridors, maids are standing by, ready to assist if a guest needs anything. A torn hem, a spilled drink, a request for a shawl. In the basement, the laundresses are washing the linens that will be needed tomorrow because the guests are staying overnight and every bed must have fresh sheets. In the attic, the servants who aren't working tonight are trying to sleep, but the music from the ball echoes through the walls. They'll be woken at 5 a.m. to begin preparing breakfast for 50 people. The ball ends at 2 in the morning. The guests retire to their rooms, exhausted from dancing. They fall asleep in comfortable beds, satisfied and happy. But the servants' work is just beginning. The banquet hall must be cleaned, the dishes must be washed, the floors must be swept. The furniture must be returned to its proper place. This work takes until 5 a.m., and then the morning shift begins. So while the guests sleep peacefully, the servants work through the night. And in the morning, when the guests wake and ring for breakfast, a maid will appear with a tray. The guest will eat fresh pastries and hot coffee, and never think about the fact that the person serving them has been awake for 24 hours. This is the cost of a single ball. 200 hours of servant labor, dozens of injuries, burns, cuts, strained muscles, exhaustion that accumulates day after day until it becomes a permanent state of being. And for what? So that 50 wealthy people can dance and drink champagne and feel sophisticated. The irony is that George Vanderbilt was considered a progressive employer. He paid his servants relatively well compared to other estates. He provided them with housing and food. He built a school and a hospital in the village of Biltmore for his estate workers and their families. He supported conservation efforts and invested in the local community. By the standards of his time and class, he was enlightened. But he still operated within a system that treated human beings as tools. He still required his servants to be invisible. He still expected them to work 16-hour days with no days off. He still dismissed them if they married or became ill or made mistakes. His progressivism had limits, and those limits were defined by his class interests. This is the paradox of the Gilded Age. The same people who built libraries and funded universities and supported the arts also exploited workers ruthlessly. They saw no contradiction. They believed that wealth gave them the right to luxury and that the working class existed to provide it. They believed in a natural hierarchy, where some people were meant to serve and others were meant to be served. And this belief was built into the architecture. Biltmore's hidden corridors and secret staircases weren't just practical. They were ideological. They made the hierarchy physical and permanent. They ensured that the servants would always be separate, always be lesser, always be invisible. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Biltmore didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a larger pattern of extreme wealth and inequality that defined the Gilded Age. Between 1870 and 1900, America experienced unprecedented economic growth. Industrialization created enormous fortunes. The Vanderbilts made their money in railroads, the Rockefellers in oil, the Carnegies in steel, the Morgans in banking. These men became richer than kings, and they spent their money on conspicuous displays of wealth. They built mansions in Newport, Rhode Island. They threw parties that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They bought yachts and racehorses and art collections. They competed with each other to see who could be more extravagant. And the public was fascinated. Newspapers covered their parties and their scandals. People lined up to catch glimpses of them. But this wealth was built on the backs of workers. Factory workers labored 12 hours a day in dangerous conditions for pennies. Coal miners died in cave-ins and explosions. Railroad workers were injured and killed building the lines that made the Vanderbilts rich. And domestic servants worked themselves to exhaustion maintaining the households of the wealthy. There were no labor laws, no minimum wage, no maximum hours, no safety regulations, no workers' compensation. If you were injured on the job, you were fired. If you complained about conditions, you were blacklisted. If you tried to organize a union, you were arrested or beaten or killed. The Gilded Age was called gilded, not golden, because the surface was shiny but the interior was rotten. The wealth and beauty were real, but they were built on exploitation and suffering. By 1900, there were 1.5 million domestic servants in America. Most were women. Many were immigrants, Irish, German, Italian, Polish. Many were African Americans who had few other employment options. Domestic service was one of the only jobs available to working-class women. Factory work was dangerous and paid even less. Teaching required education that most didn't have. Marriage was an option, but only if you could find a husband who earned enough to support a family. So women went into service. They left their families and their homes and went to work in the houses of the wealthy. They gave up their freedom, their privacy, and their dignity. And they did it because the alternative was starvation. The stigma of being in service was real. Servants were looked down upon by society. They were considered lower class, uneducated, unrefined. Even other working-class people sometimes looked down on them. But they had no choice. They needed to survive. Biltmore was unique in some ways. It was larger than most estates. It was more isolated, located in the mountains of North Carolina, rather than in a city or established resort area like Newport. The Vanderbilts lived there year-round, unlike many wealthy families who moved between multiple homes. This meant the servants couldn't leave even seasonally. They were trapped there permanently. But in other ways, Biltmore was typical. The servant hierarchy, the rules of invisibility, the long hours, the low pay, the lack of personal freedom. These were standard across all wealthy households. Whether you worked at Biltmore or at a mansion in New York or at an estate in England, the experience was similar. You were invisible. You were expendable. You were a tool. The system began to break down after World War I. The war created labor shortages. Factories needed workers to produce munitions and supplies. They offered better wages than domestic service. Women who had been maids and laundresses left to work in factories. They had more freedom, more money, and more dignity. The 1920s brought more changes. Technology reduced the need for servants. Central heating meant no more carrying coal. Electric appliances meant less manual labor. Washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators. These inventions didn't eliminate the need for domestic workers, but they reduced it. Social attitudes were changing too. The idea that wealthy people needed armies of servants began to seem old-fashioned. The democratic ideals that had always been part of American rhetoric started to be taken more seriously. The extreme inequality of the Gilded Age became embarrassing. The Great Depression dealt the final blow. Even wealthy families had to cut expenses. Servants were dismissed. Estates were closed or sold. The era of the grand American mansion with dozens of live-in servants came to an end. George Vanderbilt died in 1914, relatively young at 51. His widow Edith struggled to maintain the estate. The operating costs were enormous. In 1930, she opened Biltmore to public tours to generate income. It was one of the first private homes in America to do so. Today, Biltmore is a major tourist attraction. 1.4 million people visit every year. They tour the grand rooms. They admire the art and architecture. They take photographs in the gardens. And increasingly, they tour the servant areas too. The basement kitchens are now part of the tour. The narrow staircases. The cramped servants' quarters. The laundry room. These spaces have been preserved and interpreted. Signs explain what happened there. Tour guides talk about the servants' lives. This is progress. For decades, the servant's story was ignored. Tours focused only on the Vanderbilts and their guests. The people who actually made the house function were invisible in death as they had been in life. But now, their story is being told. Not completely, not perfectly. Many of their names are still unknown. Most of their personal experiences are lost. But at least they're acknowledged. The question is, why does this story matter? Why should we care about servants who lived and died over a century ago? We should care because their story reveals something important about how societies function. Biltmore was beautiful. The architecture was magnificent. The art collection was world-class. The gardens were stunning, but all of that beauty was built on invisible suffering. The grandeur required exploitation. The luxury required someone to pay the cost. And that cost was paid by people who had no choice. They weren't volunteers. They weren't well-compensated professionals who could quit if they didn't like the job. They were desperate people who took the only option available to them, and then found themselves trapped in a system that dehumanized them. This pattern isn't unique to the Gilded Age. It's not unique to Biltmore. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history and continues today. Every luxury hotel is maintained by housekeepers who work long hours for low pay. Every expensive restaurant is supported by dishwashers and prep cooks who labor in hot kitchens. Every wealthy household that employs domestic workers recreates, in miniature, the same dynamics that existed at Biltmore. The workers are still invisible. We don't see the housekeeper who cleaned our hotel room. We don't think about the person who washed the dishes at the restaurant. We don't know the names of the people who make our comfortable lives possible. We benefit from their labor while remaining ignorant of their experiences. The architecture of inequality has changed, but the structure remains. We don't have hidden corridors anymore, but we have back entrances and service elevators. We don't have call bells, but we have apps that summon workers with the press of a button. We don't require servants to turn their faces to the wall, but we often don't make eye contact with the people who serve us. Biltmore is a mirror. It shows us what we prefer not to see. It reveals the human cost of grandeur. It asks us to consider who pays the price for luxury and whether that price is acceptable. George Vanderbilt is remembered. His name is on the estate. His portrait hangs in the entrance hall. His vision and taste are celebrated. Tourists learn about his life, his education, his travels, his accomplishments. But the servants are forgotten. We don't know most of their names. We don't have their photographs. We don't know their stories. They lived and worked and suffered and died, and history barely recorded their existence. Both groups were essential to Biltmore's story. The Vanderbilts provided the vision and the money. The servants provided the labor that made the vision real. But only one group gets to be remembered. Only one group gets to tell their story. This documentary is an attempt to correct that imbalance, to say their names, even when we don't know them, to describe their work, even when no photographs captured it, to honor their humanity, even though the system tried to erase it. The servants of Biltmore were not victims without agency. They made choices within the limited options available to them. They formed friendships and found moments of joy. They took pride in their work, even when that work was exploitative. They were complex human beings, not just symbols of oppression. But they were also trapped in a system that gave them few choices and no power. They deserved better than they got. They deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with dignity. They deserved to have their stories told. So here's the final image. Walk through Biltmore today. Stand in the banquet hall with its 70-foot ceiling and its massive fireplace and its Flemish tapestries. Admire the beauty. Appreciate the craftsmanship. But then walk down to the basement. Stand in the laundry room where women worked in 100-degree heat. Walk through the narrow service corridors where servants rushed with heavy loads. Climb the tight spiral staircases that led to their cramped rooms. Feel the contrast. Understand the cost. Remember the invisible. Because they were there. In every grand room, behind every beautiful object, supporting every moment of luxury, there were human beings working themselves to exhaustion. They carried the weight of the Gilded Age on their backs. They made America's grandest house possible. And they did it while being told, every single day, that they didn't matter. But they did matter. They do matter. Their story matters. And as long as we remember them, they're not invisible anymore. The ghosts of Biltmore's underground life are still there, in the corridors and staircases and basement rooms. They're there in the architecture that was designed to hide them. They're there in the call bells that summoned them. They're there in the worn steps of the spiral staircases they climbed thousands of times. Listen carefully, and you can almost hear them. The footsteps rushing through the corridors, the whispered conversations, the clatter of dishes, the sound of coal being shoveled, the exhausted sighs at the end of another endless day. They were America's most invisible workers, but their labor built something that still stands. Not just a house, not just a monument to wealth, but a reminder, a warning, a lesson about what happens when we value beauty more than humanity, when we prioritize comfort over justice, when we allow some people to be invisible so that others can shine. Biltmore is beautiful, but beauty has a cost, and someone always pays it. Remember them. The ones who carried the coal, the ones who washed the silk, the ones who stood with their faces to the wall, the ones who worked 16 hours a day for a lifetime and died without anyone knowing their names. They were there. They mattered. This was their story. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe to uncover more hidden histories. Hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on the invisible workers who built America's grandest estates. Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten voices back to life.